I feel like anytime you go to talk about Michigan over the course of the last, I don't know, 3 months or so, and you go to give them any credit whatsoever, you have to preface it with, I know that there are sign stealing allegations. And I know that you can't just set those aside. I would love to say in a perfect world, let's just pretend like those don't exist. You can't, but for the sake of the argument today, let's pretend as if the Michigan sign stealing allegations don't exist. Because I don't know, I have a pretty good idea of how much, I guess, let me preface, I have a pretty good idea that with the evidence that has been presented, that the allegations are true. And that goes a long way in deciding who's going to win some games and who's not going to win some games and how successful you are or are going to be. So before I dive too far into this topic, I'm keenly aware of what has been alleged of Michigan and how that factors into their success rate. Okay. But there was a time in college football over the course of the last 10 years or so where one of the popular trends, especially in the coaching world, was to bring either position coaches or, if you were really lucky, an offensive coordinator from the NFL to college football to run your offense. And you saw it lead to a lot of success at a lot of programs. Now, whether those programs reach those heights because of the NFL influence or not, I think, is up for debate. But you saw, for instance, Alabama at their offensive coordinator spot for a series of years had Lane Kiffin, former NFL coach, Brian Daboll, former NFL coach, Bill O'Brien, former NFL coach. In kind of sequential order there, B, NFL, and I don't know that they're NFL guys per se, but had NFL experience come to college football. You saw it with Todd Monken at Georgia, leads them to a title, leads them to 2 titles as the offensive coordinator. So you saw, and Michigan was in on it as well. They had Jed Fish, a former NFL guy, as their offensive coordinator. They had Pep Hamilton, a former NFL guy, as their offensive coordinator. And they didn't see the success that Georgia and Alabama saw in those positions with NFL guys running their offenses. But that was the trend, was, hey, we're going to hire an NFL guy. And it makes a ton of sense. You're really difficult to defend if you can go in multiple formations or you can do multiple things. You can run the ball both hat on a hat and zone, or you have a pro-style passing attack mixed in with, air raid concepts, etc. When you're really multiple, you're really difficult to defend. And when you have guys who are well-versed in having multiple styles of offense, that goes a long way. So hiring NFL guys to run your offense was a really a bit of a trend there that worked out for a couple of different programs. Now, you got to be able to entice those guys with money and recruiting advantages, and the idea that having this job on your resume is going to go a long way in helping you out. Like, I don't know where Brian Daboll's coaching career looks like today if he didn't have the 1 year as Alabama's offensive coordinator. You win a title, bump back up to the NFL. You're now the head coach of the New York Giants. Some people maybe wish that wasn't the case, but that's how quick your career ascends if you have that level of success. So there were some enticing situations for NFL guys to bump down to college and then bump right back up. Todd Monken did it with Georgia. Go run the Dogs offense for a couple of years, win a couple of titles, jump right back to the NFL. And it's a logical thought process of, these guys have answers for damn near every situation we're going to face. That's going to be really invaluable. And Michigan didn't see that level of success. They didn't see the same results that Georgia and Alabama had. But they did the opposite of what everybody else did. They went back to college coordinators on the offensive side of the ball and brought in NFL guys on the defensive side of the ball. They had Don Brown, who's widely regarded as one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, for a couple of years, and he got torched by the Ohio State defense time and time again. So what did Jim Harbaugh do? He went back to the same playbook and kind of flipped it on his head of, if everybody has answers on the offensive side of the ball in high leverage situations, in clutch situations, in the situations that matter most, am I just leaving myself wide open to being beaten on that side of the football because the opponent on their side of the offense has all the answers? So he started bringing in NFL defensive coordinators, NFL guys who had NFL experience on the defensive side of the ball. And I realized that it kind of coincides with the sign stealing allegations, so I can't discount that. But you bring in Mike Macdonald to run your defense, and things somewhat magically, again, prefacing the sign stealing allegations, things somewhat magically turn around for you a little bit, where you have answers now that you didn't have before. And Mike Macdonald had coached under Jim Harbaugh's brother, John, with the Baltimore Ravens, and kind of got a glowing recommendation of like, hey, if you want to hire somebody who's got this pedigree and this caliber to be a college defensive coordinator, this guy could be it for you. And things went pretty well for him. Then they hired Jesse Minter after Mike Macdonald goes immediately from being a defensive coordinator for Michigan. Things go well, jumps back to the NFL. Jesse Minter was a guy who coached in the NFL, who had NFL defensive experience, who grew up the son of a coach. His dad, Rick Minter, was the head coach at Cincinnati. But Jesse Minter worked in the NFL, went to Vanderbilt, and then went to Michigan. Got his chops in the NFL, learned how to be pretty multiple, learned how to, hey, we're going to rush the passer with 4. We're going to work on our edge rushers from defensive linemen and linebacker spots. We're going to format our defense a little bit differently than other schools are. And it's worked. And it makes sense that it would work. In the NFL, it's 100% football 100% of the time. There is no making sure your kids are going to class. There is no recruiting. It's learning about the game of football, learning everything you can and getting better at every single aspect, whether it's footwork, whether it's athleticism, whether it's strategy, whether it's theory, no matter what the case may be, it's 100% football 100% of the time. So you get those guys that have somewhat master's degrees or doctorates in their given fields, dropping down to compete against guys who have their bachelor's or master's degrees in their given field. And there's an advantage there. And to their credit, Michigan has exploited that advantage. You haven't seen that trend kind of continue outside of Michigan. Now, Chris Kiffin, Lane Kiffin's brother, coached in the NFL and went to go coach at Ole Miss. Makes sense. And Ole Miss is one of the 10 best teams in the country. But I'm surprised that trend hasn't really continued on the defensive side of the ball. We all are focused on offense, right? And it makes sense because that's what is sexy. That's what garners all the attention, gets you all the highlights. Very rarely is defense heralded, even when it's at its best. But it's still a major point of the game. It's still a major part of the game. You see USC's lack of success this year is almost directly attributed to having a bad defense. There are other schools that, the Ohio State-Michigan game, if Ohio State can get off the field ever against Michigan, they have a really good chance to win that game. They can't. But you have a bunch of NFL guys coming down to coach offenses and doing a bang-up job, killer job. And Michigan's really kind of the only one that says, hey, we're going to do this on the defensive side of the ball as well, and kind of buck the trend of have those guys run your offenses, because those guys didn't end up doing great work. I'm sure Jed Fish, probably, who's now the head coach at Arizona, probably feels like he did a really good job at Michigan. I'm sure Pep Hamilton probably feels like he did a really good job at Michigan, but the results aren't nearly what they were for other NFL guys who went to college programs. And the results aren't even close to what doing it on the other side of the football have been for Michigan. So I find it really interesting, and maybe it's just not as prevalent in the defensive side of the ball, and maybe Jim Harbaugh's got a built-in advantage that his brother is coaching with 8 to 12 dudes on the defensive side of the ball going, this guy's really good, this guy's really good, this guy's got a future, this guy's got a future, and creating that pipeline to his brother in college football. But I find it somewhat unbelievable that nobody else has went like, well, wait a second. How do I get an NFL guy to come run my defense? How do I get somebody to come teach my kids cover 6? How do I get somebody to framework my defense in the image of a top flight NFL defense? Michigan's really kind of the only one that's done it. And they're one of the 2 teams left standing in the college football playoffs. Now, again, there are sign stealing allegations. I can't discredit that. But if you put that aside, and I realize that that's a tall task, I realize that might be too much to say. Forget about the fact that there are allegations that they knew what plays were coming. Even if that wasn't the case, even if that hadn't come out, even if that was completely fabricated, they've had a lot of success kind of bucking the trends of college football, and nobody else has followed it up. I wonder why that is. Maybe it's easier said than done. But Michigan has found an itch in bringing NFL guys to run their defenses, and the results have kind of shown that out. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. National championship game next week. Looking forward to it. I got a question about Michael Penix Jr. and what his legacy looks like if Washington wins a title. Is there a certain stratosphere that he elevates himself to with a championship? We'll ask that question on Sunday's episode of the Daily Huddle. Again, if you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we are pumping out here on Saturday Glory. If you are listening on the podcast, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. We'll see you Sunday for another episode of the Daily Huddle here on Saturday Glory.